So I've mentioned this in a few videos in the last, I don't know, few months or so that I feel like my editing has changed. Well, I know that my editing has changed. And I thought I'd make a video about how it's changed and perhaps more importantly, why. And talk a little bit about that because I feel like in the last few years, I've really shifted the way I approach the edit to a photo. And there's some key reasons why, and there's some key things that I do now that I didn't really do as much or sometimes not at all in the past. And I want to walk through that. So I'm here in Luminar Neo, and while this video is about photo editing, it's not specific to Luminar Neo. Whether I'm using this app or a different app, the approach and the things that I think about and the way that I've changed is applicable regardless of what app you use. I just happen to be in Luminar. It's my favorite app and the one that I use the most. So if you look at a photo like this, a few years ago, I would come back from a shoot like this, and I'd be really excited, and I still would be really excited if I had a nice sunset like this. And I would come back and I would maybe open Develop Raw, and I would probably do a few things like this where I would come in and kind of play around a little bit with the light and the color and the saturation and the vibrance. And I would do something probably like that. And then I would close it and I would go get toning, and I would come in and say, well, I really like this kind of magenta tones in a sunset. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'd probably jump into golden hour because, hey, it's a sunset and I get golden hour. I want to bump that up a little bit. I'm also a big fan of color harmony. And again, the tools are immaterial. The point is I was getting things like this, not to mention that I would often use a structure AI and just crank up some structure. And as you can see, very rapidly you get a photo that is completely out of touch with reality. And that's really based on the edit. I mean, the photo's a fine photo. It's not going to win any awards, and it's not going to be like oh my gosh, this is the greatest photo I've ever taken, but the processing really has gone too far, and I did that habitually, partly because I was excited and in a hurry and all those kind of things. But over the last few years, I've really changed a few key things that have allowed me to really come in and take a more intelligent and more, frankly, reasonable approach to photo editing. So let me reset this, kind of walk through what I do now and why. Okay, the first change that I've really embraced in the last few years is that I'm a bit more thoughtful and I create more of a plan, at least mentally, in terms of how I approach a photo. So I look at something like this, and of course it's a beautiful sunset, but I look at the photo before I go in and edit, and I think about the things that I want to do. I want to make some adjustments to the light in a few areas. I do want to bring up the color. I just don't want to overdo it. And I want to accentuate the overall mood. So I do start in Develop Raw. In this case, maybe I would use a camera profile, maybe Adobe Standard. I pull down the highlights a little bit, and this is something I like to do is look at the histogram. Now, this was shot years ago, handheld in lower light with a micro 4/3 camera. I don't have a starburst. I've got a blown out section. I totally get that. I'm not going to recover that, and that's okay. But what I want to do is, put on the highlights a little bit, but I don't want to try to fake it like that where you get that burnt edge around it. So, I'm going to maybe pull it down a little bit, maybe lift the shadows. I would play with temperature or tint a little bit here. Actually, might go a tiny bit cooler and maybe a tiny bit of tint and maybe a slight bit of vibrance. I tend not to do a lot of color work in Develop Raw, but one of the things I do is spend some time before I start editing is considering really what's the viewer experience of the photo. What are they going to see? What do I want to draw their eye to? What's really the focus or the focal point of the photo? And in that process, I'm essentially visualizing my end result and plotting out how I want to go about getting there. Now, the second thing that's different for me is that I'm quite a bit slower in my editing. Now, you wouldn't necessarily see this on YouTube because, of course, I edit out all the stuff that you don't want to see or I don't want to waste your time on. But in my own editing, I'm quite a bit slower. I used to go fairly quickly through photos, and that's because I didn't really have a plan. I wasn't being thoughtful, and of course, I was in a hurry. And I don't know why I was in a hurry other than just pure excitement. And I frankly love to edit photos. So if I came back from a scene like this, I'd be in doing those things quickly and not really giving a lot of thought to it and going much too fast. So now I come in, I've done my basics with Develop Raw. I'd probably come into super contrast, play around a little bit with the light just to see what kind of impact it will have on the photo and make some decisions there around what I want to do. I definitely want to bring up a little bit of that. So I'd probably play with super contrast, do something about like that. And by the way, I forgot on Develop Raw, something I used to never really do is in here, go into optics, fix that distortion, and that's going to help me out quite a bit. But when I go slower, I realized a customer bought a print of mine years ago, and for various reasons there was a screw up, mostly due to my inexperience with it. This was many years ago, and I was so apologetic because it was later than I told them it would be and all that sort of thing. And this stuck with me for so long, but the customer told me, "Don't worry, Jim, there's no such thing as an art emergency." That gave me a lot of relief, frankly, because of the delays in getting the print to this customer. But it's really stuck with me because I don't have to be in a hurry. It's not like the world is waiting to see what I do with this photo. And so having a plan, being thoughtful about it, and taking your time to get the edit right and achieve your vision, super, super important, and something I think about every time I edit. Now, the third thing that's really changed for me is that I'm quite a bit more subtle than I used to be. I love color. I say that probably in every video. If you've been here, you've probably heard me say it. I love color, and I love amping up color, and I love colorful scenes like this. But as I showed you in the first example of kind of my old approach, if you will, to editing, I wasn't careful with it. And cumulative edits are cumulative. So if you use a color tool and then another color tool and then a third or fourth color tool, it's just way too much. And I've learned over time that one or two color tools is plenty, especially if you're starting with a scene that already has a fair amount of color. So maybe you come in here with golden hour and you do a little bit like that just to give you a little bit extra bump to those warm tones. And maybe I'd come into color harmony and give it a tiny bit of brilliance, maybe a tiny bit of warmth. And in fact, I think I'd pull those back a little bit, and that's because it's getting to be a little bit over the top. I want to bring up the colors here, so maybe I would go into a little bit of the highlights or the midtones and try to bring up some of that blue to create a little bit of that color contrast that I like to have in my photos. But again, it's something that I want to be careful with and I want to be subtle with. So maybe something like that. And if you can tell, I don't really have an exact plan for this photo because this isn't really an editing tutorial. This is a demonstration on essentially what not to do, which is what I did for years, frankly. But I've got much better looking result now with a nice subtle application of color. And that's because, I did a little bit in Develop Raw, but then you come in and use Golden Hour and Color Harmony in this case. That's plenty. There's enough color there to really pop the photo without going over the top. Now, the fourth thing that has really come into play for me is that I want to take control. I want to be in charge of what's happening in the photo, and I really want to spend a lot of time thinking about and working on the light. Obviously, the light's the most important aspect of any photograph, and coming in and just adjusting things kind of blindly without a plan doesn't really work. And so for me, I want to take that control. And for me, when I say control, what I really mean is masking. There's a lot of different things that you can do in a photo, of course, but masking allows you to really have control where your edits go, and that allows you to be targeted and specific. You've probably, again, if you've been here before, you've heard me say that countless times, but in this case, maybe I'd get a linear gradient and maybe I'd drop it down here in the bottom of the frame and make a few minor adjustments. Maybe I'll go a little bit brighter, something like that. Maybe I'll go a little bit more contrast, maybe something like that. Again, notice that was subtle, but it's also with the mask gives me quite a bit more control. So before and after. And let's say I'm happy with that. The other thing that I do is I repeat the use of Develop again and again and again because it is really the best tool in Luminar. It gives you so much power and control. So in this case, I'd probably come in with a radial gradient and I would draw something in here. I'm kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of leaning into the fact that I have blown out highlights. So I'm going to come in here and create a radial mask around them. And I'm just going to go slightly brighter because why not? What it does is it'll create a little bit of a haze around that area. And if you play with the contrast as well, you can see it's creating a little bit more or less haze. And so, you may also want to come in and warm it up a tiny bit, maybe even play with the tint a little bit. The bottom line is I'm leaning into kind of what I've got going on in the photo, and I'm not trying to fake it or hide it behind something else. I'm just working with what I have, and I'm using targeted edits with masks to make sure that I control what I'm doing in the photo. So now I have something that looked like that, which I didn't really like the look of how the clouds look around the sun, but now it's a little bit more blown out, but it's got a nice kind of soft gradient, for lack of a better term, because of the radial mask with that gradient that goes from that really blown out center section and it kind of fades it into the rest of the photo. And so the surrounding clouds, I think they blend together better than they did before. There it is before, and there it is now. I think it looks a lot more natural. And so that's what I'm talking about with control is I want to make sure that I'm using masks so that I'm targeted and specific, like with that linear gradient in the foreground, that radial gradient around the sun lets me control the image and the edit. And that's what I want to do. I want to be in control because it's my photo and I want the edit to look the way I want the edit to look. And the last piece is that I actually find, despite all the advancements with AI, I don't use AI as much as I did in the past. Now, when I say I don't use AI as much, that kind of means two things. I don't use it as frequently, and I use it to a lesser degree when I do use it. The two AI tools in Luminar, for example, that I use the most are these: Enhance AI, which is for me mostly Accent AI, and also Structure AI. So I might come in with Structure AI, and I just like, in a situation like this, I like a little bit of a smooth, kind of soft glow, and I think negative structure across the entire photo works wonders. In the past, I would come in with Accent AI, and I would do something like that because, hey, I love colors, and wow, look at all that stuff, but I don't really do that anymore. If I do use Accent AI, I usually control it with a mask, which was point number 4, right? Control the edits and be in charge. But in this case, on point number 5, using AI, if I do use it, I'm using it a pretty small amount. Here, I feel like I can get away with a 10 across the entire photo. I don't think I would do much more than that because Accent AI does a whole lot of stuff to a photo. So I think you want to be careful, which is why I either, oftentimes both, I will mask it in and use it to a small degree. In this case, I don't think I have to mask it, but just being careful with it and using it sparingly. Both of these tools, Accent AI and Structure AI, I think gives me a better looking image without going over the top and without letting AI kind of take over. And the truth is, AI cannot read my mind, as good as it is, and those two tools are probably my two favorite ones, but it can't read my mind. It doesn't really know what I want to do to the photo. It's doing things based on its own algorithms and that sort of thing. There's a lot of AI tools here, and they're great at doing what they do. They just don't always fit in with my workflow, so you don't see me using them in a lot of videos, especially in the last year or so. I don't use them quite as much. And so that's kind of the overall approach that I'm taking, being more thoughtful and more planned, being slower, being more subtle, having more control and less dependence on AI. I think it's giving me better results. So now I've got a photo that started like that and is ending like that, and I think that looks fantastic. And so the other thing I told you I would talk about is why has this change occurred in my editing and why am I doing things like this? Well, the first one is my tastes have just changed, right? As I've continued to take photos and edit photos, and trust me, I've edited thousands of photos in the last, 15 years or whatever I've been doing this, thousands and thousands of photos. It's just natural that your taste would change. I'm sure yours have as well. So I've gone away from some of the gee whiz, wow, OMG, look what I can do to a photo. And I'm focused more on, can I make a beautiful photo, beautiful scene look as beautiful in a photo? And so I'm a little bit more focused on that as opposed to, wow, this is crazy. Look at the cool stuff I can change. I'm looking to enhance my photos. The other reason it's changed is a lot of things I talk about because I've wanted to slow down and get better results. That causes me to think more, be more deliberate, more controlled, all that. So that's kind of played into it as well. The other thing is that I've been fortunate enough, especially with the Luminar folks, to go on 3 different tours to Iceland, and as well as some other shows that I've been to in different places in the photo industry, and that puts me in close proximity to some really incredible professional photographers, and hanging around them, just kind of seeing what they do, like if they're editing or if they're giving a presentation at a show or in a workshop and talking about their editing. I'm picking up tips and I'm thinking about what they're doing and how I can apply those kind of tips and tricks to my workflow. And so yes, I've been influenced by being around people that I consider amazing, amazing photographers. And that's one of the beauties about being on workshops or photo tours, is just that you have access to all these amazing, talented photographers. And I learn something every time. I love to watch pros edit their photos. It's just so interesting. And like I said, I pick up tips all the time. And that's definitely had an influence on me as I've tried to get better and better. And that's really the last part, is I want to be really good at this. And so I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to make beautiful photos because I want my editing to be really good. I want people to look at it and say, wow, that's a really good edit. In the past, I feel like I did a whole lot of kind of really pushing the envelope, really heavy saturation or heavy detail, really kind of that old kind of HDR kind of look, which I do like. I'm going to admit, I just like it. But I did that for a long time, and I think that carried over, even though I stopped doing a significant amount of HDR. I think a lot of that carried over into my editing where I was still pushing the sliders pretty far because it was like a gee whiz, oh wow, look at how cool this is. Look how much of a change I can make in the photo. And where I am now is I want to make beautiful photos, and I want to take something that I start with and craft it into something even more beautiful than it was when I saw it. And of course, I want to respect the bounds of reality. And so it's really just a desire to be really good at this so that I can hopefully share and impart tips and tricks and help everybody else that maybe watch my videos get better at their craft as well. Because I think we're all learning, we're all at different stages. I'm learning stuff all the time, and I hope to share stuff with you all that helps you guys improve. Those are the reasons why. And of course, part of that, those are the reasons or the methods or the how, if you will, of my editing has changed. But I feel like my shift has really been a few years in the making, and I'm never done changing. I'm going to continue changing and sort of evolving my workflow and my approach, but I feel like I've settled on an approach that really gives me some great results. I'm going to keep diving into that here on YouTube every week. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope this gives you some ideas about your own editing. I'll be back soon with more tutorials. Thanks, my friends. You guys have a great day. Appreciate it. I'll see you soon. Until next time. Adios.